He shoved her out mid-air for a fart, but she survived the fall and came back for him. Hi, my beautiful family. Thank you for sticking around with me through our trying times. I really appreciate your love and support. We're finally back again to give you many more beautiful stories. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. Dr. Priya Patel woke up in a hospital bed with no memory of how she'd gotten there, her body wrapped in bandages and her mind struggling to piece together fragments of a nightmare that felt too surreal to be real. The steady beep of monitors filled the sterile room, and through the window she could see the Seattle skyline, a view that should have been comforting, but instead filled her with inexplicable dread. "You're awake." The voice belonged to Detective Sarah Chen, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes that had clearly seen too much. "I'm Detective Chen with Seattle PD. How are you feeling?" Priya tried to speak, but her throat felt raw and damaged. When she finally managed words, her voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "What happened to me?" Detective Chen pulled out a notebook, her expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Whitmore, you fell from a helicopter 3 days ago. You're extremely lucky to be alive." Fell? The word felt wrong in Priya's mouth. Images flashed through her mind. Richard's face twisted with rage, his hands on her shoulders, the terrifying moment when solid ground disappeared beneath her feet. "The official report from your husband states that you became violently ill during a private flight, and in your distress, you lost your balance and fell from the aircraft into Puget Sound." Priya's hand instinctively moved to her throat, where she could feel the bruises forming a pattern that looked suspiciously like fingers. She remembered now, not falling, but being pushed. Not illness, but Richard's explosive fury over something as trivial as an involuntary bodily function that had embarrassed him in front of his business associates. "He pushed me," she whispered. Detective Chen leaned forward. "What did you say?" "My husband pushed me from the helicopter," Priya said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "He didn't report an accident. He committed attempted murder." "Mrs. Whitmore, that's a very serious accusation," Detective Chen said carefully. "Your husband is Richard Whitmore, the tech billionaire. He's been very concerned about your condition, visiting every day, speaking to the press about your tragic accident." Priya closed her eyes, remembering the events that had led to this moment. She'd been married to Richard for 3 years, and for 2.5 of those years, she'd been systematically isolated from her career, her friends, her independence. Richard Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Dynamics, was Seattle's golden boy, a self-made billionaire who'd built his empire on cybersecurity software. What the public didn't know was that behind closed doors, he was a man who needed to control everything, including his wife. "Detective," Priya said, "I need you to understand something. I'm not just Richard Whitmore's wife. I'm Dr. Priya Patel. I have a PhD in computer science from MIT, specializing in cybersecurity and digital forensics. Before Richard, before I lost myself, I was the lead security architect at Patel Cyber Solutions." Detective Chen's eyebrows rose. "Your own company?" "My family's company. My father started it, and I was supposed to take over." Priya's voice carried the weight of dreams deferred and talents wasted. "But Richard convinced me that being his wife was more important than my career. He said he needed me to focus on our life together, our future family." "And you gave up your company?" "I gave up everything." The admission tasted bitter. "My career, my financial independence, my connection to the work I loved. Richard said he would take care of me, that I didn't need to worry about money or business or technology anymore." But even as she'd played the role of the perfect billionaire's wife, Priya had never stopped thinking like a cybersecurity expert. She'd noticed things, irregularities in Richard's business dealings, suspicious network traffic from their home systems, encrypted communications that didn't match his public business activities. Mrs. Whitmore, Detective Chen said gently, even if what you're saying is true, proving attempted murder against someone with Richard Whitmore's resources and reputation will be extremely difficult. I know, Priya said, her mind already working. But I have something Richard doesn't know about. What's that? For the past year, I've been documenting everything, every threat, incident of violence, every suspicious business transaction I've observed. I've been building a digital case file. Where? Priya managed a small smile that held no warmth, hidden in places Richard would never think to look, encrypted, distributed, and completely invisible to anyone who doesn't know exactly how to find it. Detective Chen leaned back in her chair. You've been building evidence against your own husband? I've been preparing for the day I would need to fight back, Priya corrected. I just didn't expect that day to come quite so dramatically. The hospital room door opened, and a man in an expensive suit entered with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Richard Whitmore was handsome in the way that wealth can make anyone attractive, perfectly groomed, expertly tailored, radiating the kind of power that made people step aside. Darling, he said, his voice dripping with false concern as he approached her bed. Thank God you're awake. I've been so worried. Detective Chen stood. Mr. Whitmore, I was just finishing my interview with your wife about the accident. Accident, Richard repeated, his eyes never leaving Priya's face. Yes, it was such a terrible accident. Priya has been under a lot of stress lately. Her mental health has been fragile. Priya felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came whenever Richard began one of his subtle character assassinations. He was already building the narrative, the unstable wife, the tragic accident, the devoted husband dealing with his spouse's psychological issues. I'm feeling much better now, Priya said carefully, aware that every word was being analyzed by both Richard and the detective. I'm so glad to hear that, Richard said, reaching out to take her hand. His grip was gentle enough to look loving to an observer, but firm enough to send a clear message. I've arranged for the best psychiatrists in Seattle to help you through this difficult time. That's very thoughtful, Priya said, not missing the thread. Richard was already planning to have her declared mentally unstable, discrediting any accusation she might make. Well, Detective Chen said, closing her notebook, I think that's enough for today. Mrs. Whitmore needs to rest. After the detective left, Richard's mask slipped slightly. I hope you understand how precarious your situation is, darling, he said quietly. You survived a terrible accident, but accidents can happen again, especially to people who are confused about what really happened. Priya looked at her husband, this man who had systematically destroyed her confidence, isolated her from her support system, and then literally tried to kill her, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Clarity. I understand perfectly, she said. Richard smiled, satisfied that his message had been received. Good, I'll let you rest now. The doctors say you might be experiencing some memory issues due to the trauma. It's perfectly normal for accident victims to have confused recollections. After he left, Priya lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling and planning. Richard thought he'd won, that he'd successfully covered up his crime and positioned himself as the grieving husband of an unstable wife. He had no idea that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Dr. Priya Patel was very much alive, and she was about to remind Richard Whitmore and the world exactly who she really was. Have you ever felt like someone was trying to erase who you really are? Sometimes surviving isn't just about staying alive, it's about reclaiming the power that someone tried to take from you. The next morning, Priya lay in her hospital bed pretending to sleep while Richard spoke in hushed tones with Dr. Morrison, the psychiatrist he'd arranged for her care. Through barely open eyes, she watched Richard's performance, the concerned husband discussing his wife's increasing paranoia and delusional episodes. She's been exhibiting signs of severe anxiety and persecution complex, Richard was saying. Sometimes she becomes convinced that I'm monitoring her computer usage or that our home security system is somehow threatening her. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you love lose touch with reality." Dr. Morrison nodded sympathetically. Trauma can certainly manifest in technological paranoia, especially in someone with her technical background. We'll need to carefully manage her transition back to normal life. Priya bit back the urge to laugh bitterly. Richard had no idea how accurately he was describing his own behavior while trying to make her sound delusional. After they left, she waited 20 minutes before carefully getting up and walking to the window. Her body ached, but her mind was crystal clear for the first time in months. She pulled out her phone, a device Richard had insisted she carry so he could keep her safe, but which she'd long ago discovered was loaded with spyware. She opened a mindless game app and began playing, but her finger movements weren't random. She was entering a complex sequence of touches that activated a hidden partition on her phone, one that Richard's surveillance software couldn't detect. The screen briefly flashed, and suddenly she was looking at her real operating system, a custom Linux build she'd designed herself, running completely separate from the compromised Android installation that Richard monitored. A message was waiting for her. Phoenix Protocol activated. All systems green. Ready for Phase 1. AP. AP was Arjun Patel, her younger brother and the only person she'd trusted with the full scope of her situation. While Richard thought Priya had been isolated from her family, she'd actually been in constant communication with Arjun through encrypted channels that existed in the digital spaces between what Richard monitored. She typed a quick response. Phoenix survived the fall. Beginning documentation recovery. Over the past year, as Richard's abuse had escalated from psychological control to physical violence, Priya had been secretly preparing for the day she would need to fight back. Her weapons weren't physical, they were digital, precise, and devastating. She'd started by documenting everything, every instance of abuse, photographed with metadata intact. Every threatening phone call, recorded and stored in encrypted cloud storage. Every financial transaction that seemed suspicious, logged and analyzed. But the real treasure trove was what she'd discovered about Richard's business empire. As his wife, she'd had access to their home network, a network that Richard, in his arrogance, had connected to his business systems for convenience. He'd assumed that his company's cybersecurity, ironically purchased from a competitor rather than trusting his wife's expertise, was sufficient to protect him. He'd been wrong. Priya had spent months quietly exploring the digital infrastructure of Whitmore Dynamics, using techniques that were invisible to the company's security systems. What she'd found had shocked even her. Richard's cybersecurity empire was built on illegal activities that would destroy him if they ever came to light. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She quickly closed the hidden partition and slipped her phone back into her hospital gown pocket. "Come in," she called. To her surprise, it wasn't a nurse or doctor who entered, but a young woman in her 20s with short black hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Jessica Kim. I'm a journalist with the Seattle Tech Tribune. I was hoping to speak with you about your accident." Priya studied the woman carefully. Something about her demeanor suggested this wasn't a standard puff piece about the billionaire's wife's tragic accident. "I'm not sure I'm ready to speak to the press," Priya said carefully. "I understand," Jessica said, but she didn't leave. Instead, she moved closer and lowered her voice. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've been investigating your husband's company for 6 months. I think there are things about Whitmore Dynamics that the public deserves to know." Priya felt her pulse quicken. What kind of things? The kind of things that might explain why someone with your technical background has been completely absent from the cybersecurity industry despite being married to one of its most prominent figures, Jessica said quietly. The kind of things that might make someone want to silence their wife permanently.
The two women looked at each other, and Priya saw something in Jessica's eyes that she recognized, the look of someone who'd seen behind Richard's public facade. "How did you get past hospital security?" Priya asked. "I have my sources, but more importantly, I think you have information that could help a lot of people." Priya was quiet for a long moment, weighing risks and opportunities. Finally, she said, "What exactly do you know about my husband's business?" "I know that Whitmore Dynamics sells cybersecurity software to corporations and government agencies," Jessica said. "I also know that the same software includes backdoors that allow unauthorized access to those systems." Priya's breath caught. Jessica had discovered one of Richard's darkest secrets. His company wasn't just selling security, it was selling surveillance capabilities to the highest bidder. "I know that classified government data has been stolen from agencies that use Whitmore Dynamics software," Jessica continued. "And I know that your husband has been selling that data to foreign actors." "You can prove this?" Priya asked. "I can prove some of it, but I need someone with technical expertise to help me understand the full scope of what he's doing." Jessica leaned forward. "I need someone who understands cybersecurity architecture and has access to his systems." "And you think I'm that person?" "I think Dr. Priya Patel is that person," Jessica said. "I think Richard Whitmore's wife is a carefully constructed fiction designed to hide one of the most brilliant cybersecurity experts of her generation." Priya felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of bonds she'd worn for so long she'd forgotten they were there. "Jessica," she said quietly, "what I'm about to tell you could be extremely dangerous for both of us." "I'm listening." "My husband didn't just try to kill me because I embarrassed him. He tried to kill me because I discovered that Whitmore Dynamics is essentially a front for the largest corporate espionage operation in the country." Jessica's eyes widened. "You have proof?" "I have everything," Priya said. "Financial records, communications with foreign agents, technical documentation of the backdoors, evidence of data theft, records of payments for classified information. I've been building a digital case file for over a year." "Where is it?" Priya smiled for the first time since waking up in the hospital. "Distributed across 17 different cloud storage systems, encrypted with quantum-resistant algorithms, and hidden behind security measures that would take the NSA months to crack." "And Richard doesn't know?" "Richard thinks his wife is a decorative accessory who plays mindless games on her phone and shops online," Priya said. "He has no idea that Dr. Priya Patel has been systematically documenting his crimes from inside his own network." Jessica was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "What do you need from me?" "I need a platform," Priya said. "When I'm ready to release this information, I need a journalist with credibility and reach who can ensure the story gets the attention it deserves." "And what do you need to get ready?" Priya's expression hardened. "I need to get out of this hospital, get back to my systems, and finish what I started. Richard thinks he killed Dr. Priya Patel and that only his compliant wife survived. He's about to learn that he couldn't be more wrong." As Jessica left, promising to stay in touch through encrypted channels, Priya began planning her next moves. Richard had made a fatal error. He tried to destroy her physically, but he'd left her digital arsenal completely intact. More than that, he'd given her the perfect cover story. As far as the world knew, she was a traumatized accident victim recovering from a near-death experience. No one would expect her to be systematically dismantling her husband's criminal empire from her hospital bed. Richard Whitmore had built his success on the assumption that he was the smartest person in the room, that his victims were helpless, and that his crimes were too sophisticated to be detected. Dr. Priya Patel was about to prove him wrong on every count. The phoenix was rising from the ashes, and this time she was bringing fire. Priya was released from the hospital on a Thursday morning, with Richard playing the devoted husband for the cameras that had gathered to document the miraculous recovery of the billionaire's wife. As their limousine pulled away from the hospital, she noticed the way Richard's jaw tightened when he thought she wasn't looking. "The doctors say you'll need time to fully recover," Richard said, his voice carrying the careful tone he used when he wanted to sound caring but was actually delivering threats. Complete rest, minimal stress, no access to anything that might overstimulate you. Priya nodded submissively. "Of course, I just want to get better." "Good," Richard said, relaxing slightly. "I've had your computer removed from the house. The doctors agreed that technology might be triggering your anxiety attacks." "That's probably for the best," Priya agreed, while internally noting that Richard had just made his first tactical error. He'd removed her decoy computer, a machine she'd deliberately left unsecured so he could monitor it, while leaving her real digital infrastructure completely untouched. Their mansion in Bellevue was exactly as she'd left it, cold, pristine, and designed more for entertaining Richard's business associates than for actual living. As Richard helped her up the stairs to their bedroom, citing her need for rest, Priya cataloged every camera and listening device he'd installed over the past year. "I'll be working from home today," Richard announced, "just to make sure you're comfortable." "You don't need to do that," Priya said. "I know how important your business is." "Nothing is more important than your recovery," Richard replied, but she caught the calculating look in his eyes. He wasn't staying to care for her, he was staying to watch her. Once alone in their bedroom, Priya waited exactly 47 minutes before beginning phase 1 of her counterattack. She knew Richard's schedule perfectly. He would check on her in 1 hour, giving her just enough time to implement the first stage of her plan. She moved to her vanity table, opened her jewelry box, and removed what appeared to be a simple silver bracelet. In reality, it was a sophisticated piece of wearable computing she'd designed herself, a quantum-encrypted communication device disguised as jewelry. The bracelet activated with a sequence of taps that looked like nervous fidgeting. Immediately, her phone buzzed with what appeared to be a notification from a meditation app, but was actually a secure connection to her command center. "Phoenix Base, this is Phoenix 1, she typed, using gestures that activated her phone's hidden interface. "Beginning system infiltration." The response was immediate. "Phoenix 1, this is Base. All systems green. Target network vulnerable. Execute Phase 1. Priya smiled grimly. For the past year, she'd been preparing for this moment by installing what she called time bombs throughout Richard's digital empire. Dormant code that would activate on her command and begin systematically documenting and exposing his crimes. She input a complex sequence of commands, and across Seattle, her revenge began to unfold. At Whitmore Dynamics headquarters, the first changes were subtle. Security cameras that Richard thought he controlled began recording additional footage to servers he didn't know existed. Email systems started copying sensitive communications to encrypted databases. Financial transaction records began backing themselves up to secure cloud storage. More importantly, the backdoors that Richard had built into his cybersecurity software, the very backdoors he used to spy on his clients, began working against him. Priya had spent months learning the architecture of his surveillance system, and now she was turning it into a weapon. But the real masterstroke was what she'd done to Richard's personal systems. For months, Richard had been using his home office to conduct the most sensitive aspects of his criminal enterprise. He'd assumed that being in his own house, protected by his own security systems, made him invulnerable to surveillance. He'd never considered that his wife had root access to everything. As Priya input her final commands, Richard's own security cameras began recording his activities in real time. His computer started logging every keystroke, and his encrypted communications were being automatically decrypted and stored. The beauty of her system was its invisibility. Richard would never know he was being monitored until she chose to reveal it. Phase 1 complete, Priya moved to Phase 2, gathering real-time intelligence. She accessed the hidden camera network she'd installed throughout their house, devices so small and sophisticated that even Richard's security sweeps had missed them. Through her phone's hidden interface, she could see him in his office, speaking animatedly on an encrypted phone while reviewing documents marked classified. Priya's blood ran cold. She'd known Richard was selling corporate secrets, but this sounded like he was actively working to compromise national security. "No, I don't want to hear about technical difficulties," Richard continued. "You have the back doors in their systems. Use them. And if anyone asks questions, remind them how much they're being paid to not ask questions." As Richard ended his call, Priya quickly saved the recording to her distributed storage network. This wasn't just corporate espionage. This was treason.
Her bracelet vibrated with an incoming message from Arjun. "Phoenix 1, we have a problem. Someone is trying to trace our communications. Sophisticated attack, not random." Priya felt ice in her veins. If someone was actively hunting their communications, it meant Richard suspected something. Before she could respond, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Richard was coming to check on her, ahead of schedule. She quickly shut down her hidden interface and arranged herself in bed, closing her eyes and regulating her breathing to appear asleep. Richard entered quietly and stood beside the bed for several minutes, studying her face. She could feel his eyes on her, looking for any sign that she was more aware than she appeared to be. Finally, he moved away, but instead of leaving, she heard him opening drawers and searching through her belongings. "I know you're awake," he said quietly. Priya's heart hammered, but she kept her breathing steady. "I know because your respiration pattern changed when I entered the room," Richard continued. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice? I've been monitoring your vital signs through the smart home system." This was bad. If Richard had been tracking her biometrics, he might know she'd been active when she was supposed to be resting. "I also know," Richard said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge, "that someone has been accessing our network, someone with sophisticated skills and intimate knowledge of our systems." Priya felt panic rising, but forced herself to remain still. "The question is," Richard continued, "whether my wife has been lying to me about her mental state, or whether someone is using her condition to gain access to my business." She heard him move closer to the bed. "Either way, it ends now." When Priya finally opened her eyes, Richard was holding a syringe filled with clear liquid. "What is that?" she asked, dropping the pretense of sleep. "Something to help you rest more permanently," Richard said. "I'd hoped the helicopter would solve my problem, but you've always been surprisingly resilient." Priya rolled away from him, but her body was still weak from the hospital stay. Richard grabbed her arm, raising the syringe. "You know what your mistake was?" Richard said. "You forgot that I'm not just a criminal. I'm a criminal who specializes in surveillance. Did you really think you could outmaneuver me in my own house?" That's when Priya smiled. "No," she said quietly. "I knew you'd figure it out eventually. That's why everything I just did was designed to make you react exactly like this." Richard hesitated. "What are you talking about?" "The cameras," Priya said, "the ones you don't know about. They've been recording this entire conversation, including you just confessing to attempted murder while holding a syringe full of poison." Richard's eyes widened as he realized the implication. "More importantly," Priya continued, "they've been live streaming this conversation to 17 different backup servers and automatically sending copies to the FBI, the Seattle Police Department, and Jessica Kim at the Seattle Tech Tribune." Richard stared at her, the syringe trembling in his hand. "You see, Richard," Priya said, her voice growing stronger, "you taught me something important about surveillance systems. The best time to catch your target is when they think they're safe enough to reveal their true nature." "That's impossible," Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? When exactly do you think I stopped being Dr. Priya Patel and became your helpless wife? When do you think I stopped building security systems and started playing house?" The sound of sirens in the distance made Richard's face go pale. "The answer," Priya said, as she heard car doors slamming outside, "is never. I never stopped being who I really am. I just let you think I had." As police officers began pounding on the front door, Richard Whitmore realized that he'd just been outmaneuvered by the woman he tried to kill, and that his entire criminal empire was about to crash down around him. The hunter had become the hunted, and Dr. Priya Patel was just getting started. The arrest of Richard Whitmore should have been front-page news across the country.
Instead, 48 hours later, Priya watched from her temporary hotel room as the story was systematically buried beneath a flood of other breaking news stories that seemed designed to distract from her husband's crimes. "How is this possible?" she asked Jessica Kim, who sat across from her with a laptop full of corrupted files and a frustration that matched Priya's own. "Money," Jessica said grimly. "Richard's legal team has been working around the clock. They've gotten the attempted murder charges reduced to domestic disturbance. They've had the evidence from his office declared inadmissible due to illegal surveillance. And they've somehow convinced a judge that you're an unreliable witness due to head trauma. What about the recordings of his treasonous activities? Mysteristically corrupted during the routine evidence processing," Jessica said, making air quotes. "And 3 of my sources at the FBI have suddenly stopped returning my calls." Priya felt her anger building, but it was the cold, analytical anger of someone who specialized in solving complex problems. They're not just defending Richard, they're actively covering up his crimes. "Which means we're not just fighting one billionaire," Jessica said. "We're fighting a network that includes government officials, judges, and probably other defense contractors who are benefiting from Richard's espionage operation." Priya's phone buzzed with a message from Arjun. "Phoenix 1, urgent. Multiple attempts to breach our secure servers. Sophisticated attacks using military-grade malware. Someone wants our evidence badly." She showed the message to Jessica. "They're trying to destroy the evidence digitally. Can they succeed?" "Not easily," Priya said, her fingers already moving across her phone's hidden interface. "But the fact that they're trying tells me we're close to something they're desperate to protect." She pulled up the monitoring feeds from her distributed storage network. What she saw made her blood run cold. "Jessica, look at this." On her screen was a real-time map showing coordinated cyber attacks against 17 different cloud storage systems simultaneously. The attacks were sophisticated, expensive, and clearly the work of a nation-state-level adversary. "This isn't Richard's legal team," Priya said. "This is military-grade cyber warfare being deployed against a domestic target. Against me." "How is that legal?" "It's not," Priya said grimly. "Which means we've stumbled onto something much bigger than corporate espionage." Before Jessica could respond, Priya's hotel room exploded inward. Armed men in tactical gear stormed in, followed by a woman in an expensive suit who radiated the kind of authority that came from decades in Washington power circles. "Dr. Patel," the woman said as the tactical team secured the room, "I'm Deputy Director Sarah Halifax from the Department of Homeland Security. You're under arrest for cyber terrorism and unauthorized access to classified government systems." "That's impossible," Jessica said, standing up with her hands raised. "Miss Kim, I'd recommend you stay quiet unless you want to be charged as an accessory," Halifax said coolly. "Dr. Patel, the evidence against you is overwhelming. Your husband has provided us with detailed documentation of your illegal activities." "Richard is accusing me of cyber terrorism?" Jessica said. "Richard Whitmore is a patriotic American who discovered that his wife was using their marriage to gain access to sensitive defense contractor networks. When he tried to stop you, you attempted to frame him for domestic violence." "You have got to be kidding me," Jessica said.
The evidence is quite compelling, Halifax continued. Digital forensics show that Dr. Patel used her access to her husband's home network to infiltrate government systems, steal classified data, and sell it to foreign actors. Priya realized what had happened. Richard hadn't just covered up his crimes, he transferred them to her. The same technical evidence that proved his guilt could be manipulated to suggest she was the real criminal. "I want to see this evidence," Priya said. "You'll have plenty of time to review it during your trial," Halifax replied, "assuming you survive the interrogation process." The threat was barely veiled. Priya understood that she was being disappeared into the black hole of national security prosecutions, where evidence could be classified, trials could be secret, and inconvenient victims could vanish entirely. But Richard had made one crucial mistake. "Deputy Director Halifax," Priya said calmly, "before you arrest me, I think you should know that everything we've discussed in this room has been recorded and is being automatically uploaded to servers in 17 different countries." Halifax's eyes narrowed.
You're bluffing. Am I? Priya smiled. I'm a cybersecurity expert who's been preparing for this moment for over a year. Did you really think I wouldn't have contingency plans? She held up her bracelet. This device has been broadcasting our entire conversation via satellite uplink to servers in nations that don't have extradition treaties with the United States. In about 30 seconds, this recording will be automatically released to international media outlets. That's a federal crime, Halifax said. So is framing an innocent woman for her husband's treason, Priya replied. The difference is my crime comes with evidence. Halifax spoke quickly into her radio, but Priya was already moving. She activated a sequence on her phone that she'd hoped she'd never need to use, the Phoenix Protocol. Across the globe, servers began dumping massive amounts of data to WikiLeaks, international news organizations, and government agencies in allied nations. Years of Richard's crimes, financial records, communications with foreign agents, evidence of government corruption, and documentation of the cover-up attempt began flooding the internet. "Stop her!" Halifax shouted, but it was too late. Priya's phone displayed a simple message: Phoenix Protocol complete. Evidence distributed to 247 recipients across 67 countries. Genie cannot be returned to bottle. "You just committed treason," Halifax said, her composure finally cracking. "No," Priya said, as alarms began sounding from the tactical team's communications equipment. "I just prevented it." Jessica was staring at her phone in amazement. "Priya, it's working. The story is breaking simultaneously on news sites across the world. The evidence is everywhere." Halifax's radio crackled with panicked voices, reporting that classified documents were appearing on international news sites faster than they could be taken down. "You have no idea what you've done," Halifax said. "I've done exactly what I spent a year preparing to do," Priya replied. "I've used my expertise in cybersecurity to expose the largest espionage operation in American history, and I've done it in a way that makes it impossible for you to cover up." "This will destroy your life," Halifax warned. "Richard already tried to destroy my life," Priya said. "The difference is, now I'm fighting back with the truth." As Halifax and her team retreated to deal with the global crisis that Priya had just unleashed, Jessica looked at her with a mixture of awe and concern. "What happens now?" Jessica asked. "Now we wait," Priya said, watching news alerts flood her phone as the story exploded across international media. Richard's power came from operating in the shadows, from corrupting systems from within. But shadows disappear when you shine enough light on them. "And if they come after you anyway?" Priya smiled grimly. "Then they'll learn that Dr. Priya Patel didn't just survive being pushed from a helicopter. She learned to fly." Outside their hotel window, Seattle was waking up to a world where one of its most prominent citizens had been exposed as a traitor, where the government agencies meant to protect national security had been caught covering up crimes, and where a woman who was supposed to be dead had instead become the most dangerous person in America. The cyber war was just beginning, and Priya had just fired the opening shot heard around the world. 3 days after the Phoenix Protocol release, Priya sat in a secure bunker beneath the Swiss embassy in Seattle, granted temporary asylum while international authorities sorted through the massive data dump she'd unleashed. The world was in chaos, governments were falling, defense contractors were being raided, and Richard Whitmore had mysteriously vanished from federal custody during a routine transfer. But it was the encrypted message that had appeared on her secure server that morning that made her blood run cold. "Dr. Patel," the message read, "My name is Dr. Elena Volkov. I was Richard Whitmore's first wife. We need to talk. Immediately." Priya stared at the message, her mind reeling. Richard had never mentioned a previous marriage. According to every background check she'd ever seen, she was his first and only wife. Within hours, a woman in her 40s with platinum blonde hair and ice blue eyes was sitting across from Priya in the embassy's secure conference room. Dr. Elena Volkov looked like she'd been carved from stone, beautiful, cold, and absolutely lethal. Dr. Patel, Elena said in accented English, you've done something extraordinary, but also incredibly dangerous. Richard Whitmore was never the mastermind. He's a puppet, and you've just cut his strings. What are you talking about? Elena pulled out a tablet and showed Priya a photograph. Richard, 10 years younger, standing beside Elena in what was clearly a wedding photo. I married Richard 12 years ago when he was a mid-level programmer at a defense contractor. I was a cybersecurity researcher working on quantum encryption projects for the Russian government. Priya felt the pieces clicking into place. You were a spy. I was a patriot serving my country, just as you're a patriot serving yours, Elena corrected. But the marriage was complicated. Richard wasn't supposed to become emotionally attached. What was supposed to happen? I was supposed to use him to gain access to American defense networks, steal what I needed, and disappear. Instead, Richard figured out who I was and made me an offer. What kind of offer? Elena smiled with razor sharp. He offered to become a double agent, feed information to Russia while building his own criminal empire using the intelligence I provided. The marriage was his cover story, the brilliant young programmer who's married a beautiful foreign researcher. Priya felt sick. So you created him. We created each other, Elena said. But 3 years into our arrangement, Richard became unstable, violent. He began to see our partnership as ownership. When I tried to leave, he tried to kill me. Like he tried to kill me. Exactly like he tried to kill you. Except I had the backing of the SVR, Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. I survived, disappeared, and spent the next 7 years documenting Richard's activities for my superiors. Why are you telling me this? Elena leaned forward. Because Richard's escape isn't random. He's been activated by his American handlers, the same people who helped him frame you for his crimes. American handlers?
Dr. Patel, did you ever wonder why a mid-level programmer was able to build a billion-dollar cybersecurity empire so quickly? Why his software was adopted by so many government agencies despite having obvious vulnerabilities? Priya's mind raced. Because someone wanted those vulnerabilities in place. Exactly. Richard wasn't just selling secrets to Russia. He was working for a faction within the American intelligence community that wanted to create a surveillance state. The backdoors in his software weren't bugs, they were features. Elena pulled up another file on her tablet. This is a list of everyone who's purchased or licensed Whitmore Dynamics software in the past 5 years. Priya scanned the list and felt her blood turn to ice. Every major corporation, government agency, and military contractor in the United States, all with the same backdoors that allow unlimited surveillance and data extraction. Richard wasn't building a business, he was building a panopticon. But that still doesn't explain why they came after me specifically. Elena's expression grew grim. Because of what you developed before you met Richard. Your quantum encryption protocols weren't just theoretical research. They were the only technology capable of defeating the surveillance network that Richard helped create. Priya scanned at her. That's impossible. My research was purely academic. Was it? Elena pulled up another file. Dr. Priya Patel, daughter of immigrants from Mumbai, graduated summa cum laude from MIT with a dissertation on quantum-resistant encryption for distributed networks. Your theoretical framework was so advanced that the NSA classified it the moment you published. I never heard anything about classification because they buried it. But your research caught the attention of people who understood its implications. If your quantum encryption protocols were ever implemented on a large scale, they would make the entire surveillance apparatus that Richard helped build completely obsolete. Priya scanned at her. That's impossible. My research was purely academic. Was it? Elena pulled up another file. Dr. Priya Patel, daughter of immigrants from Mumbai, graduated summa cum laude from MIT with a dissertation on quantum-resistant encryption for distributed networks.
Your theoretical framework was so advanced that the NSA classified it the moment you published. I never heard anything about classification because they buried it. But your research caught the attention of people who understood its implications. If your quantum encryption protocols were ever implemented on a large scale, they would make the entire surveillance apparatus that Richard helped build completely obsolete. Priya felt the world tilt around her. You're saying I was targeted because of my research? I'm saying you were targeted because you're the only person on Earth who could theoretically build a communication system that the American surveillance state couldn't crack, Elena said. Richard's marriage to you wasn't love, it was a mission. Isolate you, monitor you, and make sure your research never saw the light of day. And when that wasn't enough, they decided you needed to be eliminated permanently. Elena pulled up one final document, a classified memo with Richard's name on it. This is from 3 months before Richard pushed you from that helicopter, Elena said. It's a request for authorization to neutralize Dr. Priya Patel due to her potential to compromise national security infrastructure. Priya read the memo with growing horror. It detailed her research, her capabilities, and the threat she posed to ongoing surveillance operations. At the bottom was an approval signature from Deputy Director Sarah Halifax, the same woman who had tried to arrest her. They were going to kill me regardless. They were going to kill you the moment you became more valuable dead than alive, Elena confirmed. The only reason you're still breathing is because Richard's attempt was sloppy, and you were smarter than they anticipated. What do you want from me? Priya asked. I want to offer you a choice, Elena said. You can keep fighting this battle alone, using the evidence you've gathered to expose Richard's crimes while his handlers systematically destroy your credibility and hunt you down. Or you can partner with me to expose the entire network. Not just Richard's crimes, but the American intelligence faction that created him, the surveillance apparatus they've built, and the international conspiracy that spans multiple governments. Why would you help me? Elena's expression softened slightly. Because I know what it's like to be a brilliant woman used as a tool by powerful men. And because the network that created Richard is now beyond the control of any single government, including mine. Priya processed this information, her mind working through the implications. Everything she thought she knew about her marriage, her targeting, even her own research had been a lie. If what you're saying is true, Priya said slowly, then the evidence I released 3 days ago was exactly what they wanted you to release, Elena finished. You exposed Richard and some mid-level corruption, but you also revealed your capabilities and your evidence-gathering methods to the people who really want you dead. I walked into a trap. You walked into a trap that was 30 years in the making, Elena corrected. But here's the thing about traps. Once you know you're in one, you can turn it against the people who set it. Elena pulled out a quantum-encrypted communicator. Dr. Patel, what I'm about to show you is the real prize. Not Richard's surveillance network, but the master system that controls every surveillance network in the Western world. You have access to that? I helped build it, Elena said with a cold smile. And I know exactly how to tear it down. But I need your quantum encryption protocols to do it safely. Priya looked at this woman, her husband's first victim, a former enemy agent, and possibly her only hope for survival, and realized that everything she thought she was fighting for had been just the opening move in a much larger game. If we do this, Priya said, there's no going back. We'll be fighting governments, intelligence agencies, defense contractors. We'll be fighting for the right of ordinary people to have private thoughts and communications, Elena interrupted. We'll be fighting to prevent the creation of a surveillance state that would make Orwell's nightmares look like daydreams. Priya thought about Richard, about the helicopter, about the year of systematic abuse and gaslighting. Then she thought about the millions of people whose communications were being monitored, whose data was being stolen, whose privacy was being violated by the system her own research had inadvertently helped protect. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Elena smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't cold. "I need you to be exactly who you've always been, Dr. Priya Patel, the most brilliant cybersecurity expert of your generation. Together, we're going to build something that Richard and his handlers never anticipated." "What's that?" "A quantum encryption network that will make their entire surveillance apparatus obsolete," Elena said. "And then we're going to give it away to everyone." As Elena began outlining their plan, Priya realized that her survival of the helicopter fall hadn't been the end of her story. It had been the beginning of the most important work of her life. Richard Whitmore had tried to kill her to protect a conspiracy. Now, she was going to use her resurrection to destroy it entirely. Have you ever discovered that everything you thought you knew about your life was actually part of someone else's plan? Sometimes the most personal betrayals are really about much larger forces at work in the world. The quantum encryption network that Priya and Elena had spent 2 weeks building collapsed in 17 seconds. Priya watched in horror as her monitoring system showed every node in their distributed network going dark simultaneously. Years of work, petabytes of evidence, and their only hope of exposing the surveillance conspiracy? Gone. "How is this possible?" she asked Elena, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards as she tried to salvage anything from the wreckage.
Quantum computer attack, Elena said grimly, studying the patterns of the system failure. Military-grade quantum processors designed specifically to crack our encryption protocols. But our protocols were quantum-resistant. I designed them to withstand. You designed them based on theoretical quantum computers, Elena interrupted. What just hit us was a generation beyond theory. Someone has been developing quantum surveillance technology in absolute secrecy. Priya felt her world crashing down. Not only had their network been destroyed, but the attack had revealed the location of every safe house, every ally, every resource they'd been counting on. Her phone buzzed with an emergency alert from Arjun. Phoenix 1, immediate extraction needed. Federal agents raiding Patel Cyber Solutions. Dad arrested, mom missing. Please advise. They have my family, Priya whispered, showing Elena the message. And they have mine, Elena replied, holding up her own phone. Her message was more direct. Dr. Volkov, your daughter Katya is in our custody. Cease all activities immediately or she dies. The two women looked at each other, seeing their own desperation reflected back. This was always the plan, Elena said quietly. They let us build the network, let us think we were winning, so they could identify every person who might threaten their system. We played right into their hands, Priya said bitterly. Worse, we gave them a field test for their quantum attack systems. We helped them perfect the very weapons they're using to destroy us. Before either could respond, the lights in their secure embassy hideout went out. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red light. But Priya's equipment continued shutting down. EMP attack, Elena said. Localized electromagnetic pulse. They're not just targeting our network, they're targeting us directly. The embassy's communication systems crackled to life. Dr. Patel, Dr. Volkov, this is Deputy Director Halifax. You have 60 seconds to exit the building and surrender, or we'll be forced to use more aggressive measures. Through the windows, Priya could see armed figures surrounding the embassy. Military vehicles, electronic warfare trucks, and what looked like a mobile quantum computing facility. How did they find us? Priya asked. The same way they found everything else, Elena said, pulling out a small device Priya didn't recognize. They've been inside our network from the beginning. That's impossible. Our encryption was perfect, Elena said, but they didn't break it. They had the keys all along. She activated the device, and Priya's blood turned to ice as she saw the signal it detected. A quantum transmitter, hidden inside her own bracelet.
The same bracelet she'd been using to coordinate their entire operation. "How long has this been transmitting?" Priya asked. "Since the moment you put it on. Every keystroke, every conversation, every plan, they've been watching it all." Priya felt the weight of her complete failure crushing down on her. Not only had she failed to expose the conspiracy, she'd helped them become stronger. Her family was in danger, Elena's daughter was threatened, and their resistance network had been thoroughly compromised. "There's something else," Elena said, her voice heavy with defeat. "I lied to you about something." "What?" "I didn't escape from Richard 7 years ago. He let me go. He's been using me to track down other potential threats to their system." Priya stared at her. "You're working for them?" "I was working for them," Elena corrected, "until I met you. Until I realized that what we'd built had grown beyond anyone's control, including ours. So everything we've done has been monitored, analyzed, and countered by people who've been planning this for decades." The embassy's communication system crackled again. 30 seconds, ladies. Your family's lives depend on your cooperation." Priya's phone buzzed with a video message. She opened it to see her parents bound and gagged in what looked like a basement, with Richard Whitmore standing behind them, holding a gun. "Hello, darling," Richard's voice came through her phone speakers. "I told you that accidents could happen again. Your parents are having a very unfortunate accident right now." Elena's phone showed a similar video. Her teenage daughter Katya, terrified and crying, with armed men in tactical gear surrounding her. "The quantum network you built was impressive," Richard continued. "Unfortunately, it was also exactly what we needed to identify every potential threat to national security in the digital age. Your resistance network has provided us with a comprehensive database of enemies of the state." "You used us," Priya said. "We used your brilliance," Richard corrected. "Just like we've always used your brilliance. The difference is, now you understand the scope of what you're fighting against." Halifax's voice returned. "Time's up. Exit the building now." Priya looked at Elena, seeing her own despair reflected back. They had two choices: surrender and watch their families die, or fight and watch their families die. "There is a third option," Elena said quietly. "What?" Elena pulled out what looked like a simple USB drive. "This contains the real quantum encryption protocols, not the ones we've been working with, the ones I've been developing in secret for the past 5 years." "You have a backup system?" "I have more than that," Elena said. "I have a virus, a quantum virus designed to propagate through surveillance networks and destroy them from the inside. But using it would mean what? It would destroy every digital system it touches: power grids, hospitals, financial networks, communication systems. It would send the entire world back to the pre-digital age." Priya stared at the USB drive. "You're talking about digital apocalypse?" "I'm talking about freedom," Elena said. "The complete destruction of the surveillance state, but at the cost of destroying digital civilization itself." "How many people would die?" "Millions, probably, but billions would be free." The windows exploded inward as tactical teams breached the embassy. Priya could hear her parents screaming over her phone as Richard tortured them. "Choose," Elena said, holding out the USB drive. "Surrender and let them build their perfect surveillance state, or destroy it all and let humanity start over." Priya looked at the drive, at Elena, at the tactical teams closing in on their position. She thought about her parents, about Elena's daughter, about the billions of people who would never know their every digital action was being monitored and recorded. She thought about the woman she'd been before Richard, Dr. Priya Patel, who had believed that technology could make the world better, not just more controlled. "There has to be another way," she said. "There is no other way," Elena said, as armed figures appeared in their doorway. "The system is too entrenched, too powerful, too complete. The only choice is submission or destruction." As Halifax entered the room with Richard beside her, both smiling with the satisfaction of complete victory, Priya realized that everything she'd fought for, her freedom, her family's safety, the principle that privacy was a human right, was about to be lost forever. The surveillance state had won. The conspiracy had successfully turned her greatest strengths against her, and now she faced the most impossible choice of her life. Save her family by surrendering to tyranny, or save humanity by destroying the world.
The darkness was complete, and for the first time since surviving the helicopter fall, Dr. Priya Patel couldn't see a way forward that didn't end in absolute catastrophe. Richard was right about one thing: she had always been brilliant. The question was whether her brilliance would be used to perfect their surveillance state or to destroy civilization itself. Either way, the woman who had survived being pushed from a helicopter was about to die, and only her choice would determine what would rise from the ashes. As Richard raised his gun toward Priya and Halifax smiled with triumph, Priya felt something click in her mind. Not panic, not despair, but the crystal-clear focus she'd always experienced when solving her most complex problems. "You know what's funny, Richard," she said, her voice suddenly calm. "What's that, darling?" he replied, keeping the gun trained on her. "You still don't understand what you're dealing with." Richard laughed. "I understand perfectly. I'm dealing with a broken woman who thought she could outsmart a system 30 years in the making." "No," Priya said, looking directly at Elena. "You're dealing with Dr. Priya Patel, and you've just made a fatal error." She held up her bracelet, the one that had been transmitting their every move to the enemy. "This device has been broadcasting everything we've done to your surveillance network," she said. "Every conversation, every plan, every technical detail." "That's right," Halifax said smugly. "You've been helping us perfect our systems." "Including this conversation," Priya continued, "including Elena's revelation about the quantum virus, including your admission that you've been building an illegal surveillance state and that you've been torturing American citizens." Richard's expression began to change. "What are you getting at?" "I'm getting at the fact that my bracelet isn't just a transmitter," Priya said. "It's a quantum encrypted relay node. And for the past 15 minutes, it's been broadcasting this entire conversation, including video, to every news organization, government agency, and social media platform on Earth." Halifax went pale. "That's impossible. We control the transmission frequencies." "You control traditional frequencies," Priya corrected, "but you've never seen quantum entanglement broadcasting. My bracelet is paired with quantum transmitters in 17 different countries, all of which are currently live streaming this conversation." Elena stared at her. "How is that possible?" "Because while you were building your quantum virus, I was building something else entirely," Priya said. "A quantum communication network that's completely immune to your surveillance systems because it doesn't use any infrastructure you can control." She activated her phone's hidden interface, and suddenly screens around the room began displaying live feeds from news stations across the globe. Every one of them was broadcasting the conversation happening in this very room. "Dr. Patel, this is CNN. Can you confirm that Deputy Director Halifax just admitted to operating an illegal surveillance network?" "This is BBC World Service. Mr. Whitmore, did you just confess to attempted murder on live television?" "This is NHK Japan. Are we witnessing a real-time coup attempt by American intelligence agencies?" Halifax was screaming into her radio for a communication blockout, but it was already too late. Priya's quantum network was operating on principles that their traditional jamming technology couldn't touch. "You see," Priya said, her confidence growing with each passing moment, "you made the same mistake every surveillance state makes. You assumed that controlling the infrastructure meant controlling the information. But quantum entanglement doesn't require infrastructure." Richard's gun was shaking in his hand.
This changes nothing. We still have your families. Do you? Priya asked. She activated another sequence on her phone, and new video feeds appeared on the screens. The feeds showed tactical teams storming into the locations where their families were being held. Not American teams, but international forces operating under emergency UN human rights protocols. You broadcast your torture of American civilians to 17 different countries, Priya explained. Several of those countries invoked emergency humanitarian intervention protocols. Your black sites are being raided by international authorities as we speak. Elena's phone buzzed with a message. Katya is safe. Extraction complete. EU Human Rights Commission. Priya's phone showed similar messages about her parents and Arjun. Impossible, Halifax said. We have diplomatic immunity, jurisdictional protections. You have nothing, Priya interrupted, because you just committed crimes against humanity on live television in front of 2 billion witnesses. But Richard wasn't finished. You think this is over? Even if you destroy me, the system will continue. There are others, backup plans, contingencies you can't imagine. You're right, Priya agreed, which is why I'm not just exposing the system, I'm replacing it. She pulled out Elena's USB drive, the one containing the quantum virus. But instead of plugging it into their systems, she connected it to her phone. Elena, your virus was brilliant, but it was designed for destruction. I've modified it. How? Instead of destroying surveillance networks, it transforms them. Instead of taking away digital infrastructure, it liberates it. Your virus becomes a gift, quantum encryption for everyone, digital privacy as a human right, surveillance technology turned into freedom technology. Elena stared at her. You're going to democratize quantum encryption? I'm going to make privacy impossible to steal, Priya said. Every smartphone, every computer, every digital device on Earth is about to receive free, unbreakable quantum encryption. Your surveillance state will become technically impossible to maintain. Halifax raised her own weapon. I won't let you destroy everything we've built. You can't stop me, Priya said simply, because the virus isn't on my phone. It's in the quantum network that's been broadcasting this conversation. It's already propagating to every connected device on the planet. As if to prove her point, phones around the world began chiming with a new notification. Quantum Privacy Protocol, installing, digital freedom activated. Richard's face had gone gray. You've doomed us all. Without surveillance capabilities, we can't protect against terrorism, cyber attacks, foreign interference. You've proven that surveillance capabilities are the threat, Priya replied. Democracy dies in darkness, but it also dies under constant observation. I'm giving humanity back the right to have private thoughts in digital spaces. Elena was looking at her with something approaching awe. You turned the greatest weapon ever conceived into a gift for everyone. I turned it into what it should have been from the beginning, Priya corrected. Technology that serves people, not the other way around. Halifax was screaming orders into her radio, but her teams were already standing down as reports poured in of their operations being exposed globally. Richard stood frozen, his gun useless against an enemy that existed in quantum superposition across the entire planet. Dr. Patel, came a voice from her phone. It was UN Secretary General Chen Wei calling directly. The Security Council is convening an emergency session. We're prepared to offer you and Dr. Volkov full international protection while we investigate these revelations. What about Richard and Halifax? Priya asked. Warrants are being issued for their arrest on charges of crimes against humanity, the Secretary General replied. They will face justice in international courts. As UN peacekeepers entered the embassy to take Halifax and Richard into custody, Elena looked at Priya with a mixture of respect and amazement. How long have you been planning this? Elena asked. "Since the moment I woke up in that hospital bed," Priya replied. "You taught me that I was fighting the wrong battle. I wasn't trying to expose the surveillance state. I was trying to replace it with something better."
And what's that? A world where privacy is a technical reality, not just a legal concept, Priya said, where people can use technology without being used by it, where digital freedom is as fundamental as any other human right. As Richard was led away in handcuffs, he turned back to Priya. "This won't end the way you think it will. You've created chaos, not freedom." "I've created choice," Priya replied. "For the first time in decades, people will have the choice to be private in digital spaces. What they do with that choice is up to them." Elena put her hand on Priya's shoulder. "You know what this means, don't you? You've just changed the fundamental balance of power in the digital age." "Good," Priya said, watching the international news feeds that were calling this the most significant moment in the history of digital rights. It was time for a change. As they prepared to leave the embassy under international protection, Priya realized that her survival of the helicopter fall had led to something she'd never imagined. Not just personal justice, but a transformation of the relationship between technology and human freedom. Dr. Priya Patel had risen from the ashes of her attempted murder to become the woman who gave digital privacy back to humanity. And that, she thought as she watched her quantum encryption protocols spread across the globe, was the best revenge of all. 6 months later, Dr. Priya Patel stood before the International Court of Justice in The Hague, not as a defendant, but as the star witness in the most significant human rights case of the digital age. The courtroom was packed with representatives from every nation on Earth, and billions more watched via quantum-encrypted live streams that no government could monitor or control. "Dr. Patel," the chief prosecutor said, "please tell the court what you observed during your marriage to the defendant." Priya looked across the courtroom at Richard Whitmore, who sat in the defendant's dock looking like a shadow of his former self. Gone was the arrogant billionaire who had pushed her from a helicopter. In his place sat a broken man facing life imprisonment for crimes against humanity. "I observed a systematic campaign to build a surveillance infrastructure that would have made the most totalitarian regimes in history seem primitive by comparison," Priya said, her voice clear and strong. "My husband and his co-conspirators used advanced cybersecurity technology to create a system where no human being could have a private thought in digital space." The evidence was overwhelming. Thanks to the quantum network Priya had built, every aspect of the conspiracy had been recorded, documented, and distributed globally in real time. Richard's confession, Halifax's admissions, the torture of civilians, the illegal surveillance operations, all of it preserved in quantum-encrypted files that were impossible to alter or destroy. "And how did you respond to these discoveries?" the prosecutor asked. "I used my expertise in cybersecurity to do what I was trained to do," Priya replied. "I identified a critical vulnerability in their system, the assumption that controlling infrastructure meant controlling information, and I exploited it. By releasing the Global Privacy Protocol? By giving every human being on Earth the technical ability to have private digital communications. Privacy isn't something that should be granted by governments or corporations. It's a fundamental human right that should be protected by technology itself." The impact of what journalists had dubbed the Priya Protocol had been immediate and revolutionary. Within hours of its release, every smartphone, computer, and connected device on the planet had quantum encryption capabilities that were mathematically unbreakable. Surveillance systems that had operated in secret for decades suddenly went dark. Government agencies found themselves unable to monitor citizens' communications. Corporate data harvesting became technically impossible. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Some intelligence agencies claimed that national security had been compromised. Authoritarian governments protested that they could no longer monitor dissidents. Tech companies that had built empires on data collection saw their business models collapse overnight.
But the results spoke for themselves. Whistleblowers in dozens of countries began exposing corruption without fear of retaliation. Journalists could protect their sources with unbreakable technical safeguards. Activists could organize resistance movements beyond the reach of oppressive governments. For the first time in the digital age, people could use technology without surrendering their fundamental right to privacy. Dr. Patel, the defense attorney said during cross-examination, "Don't you think you've made the world more dangerous? Terrorists, criminals, and hostile nations now have access to unbreakable encryption." "They always had access to unbreakable encryption," Priya replied calmly. "The NSA, CIA, and every other intelligence agency in the world had been using quantum encryption for years. What I did was democratize it, ensure that ordinary citizens had the same privacy protections as the people who were spying on them." "But the consequences? The consequences have been overwhelmingly positive," Priya interrupted. "Democracy requires privacy. Innovation requires privacy. Human dignity requires privacy. For the first time since the internet was invented, people can use digital technology without being surveilled by corporations or governments." The defense attorney sat down defeated. There was no arguing with the evidence. And more importantly, no arguing with the global transformation that Priya's actions had sparked. After the court session, Priya met Elena Volkov at a cafe overlooking the International Criminal Court. Elena looked healthier than she had in years. The stress of living a double life had lifted, replaced by the satisfaction of seeing justice done. "The verdict is a foregone conclusion," Elena said. "Richard will spend the rest of his life in prison. Halifax is facing similar charges, and 17 government officials across 3 countries have been arrested." "What about the other conspiracy members?" Priya asked. "Most of them are cooperating in exchange for reduced sentences," Elena said. "Turns out that when your criminal conspiracy is exposed to the entire world in real time, loyalty becomes a luxury most people can't afford." Priya's phone chimed with a message from Arjun. "Phoenix One, the Global Privacy Foundation, just received its largest donation yet. $2.8 billion from the Whitmore estate liquidation. We can fund quantum privacy projects in 47 more countries." "Justice has a certain mathematical elegance to it," Priya said, showing Elena the message. "Richard's stolen billions are now funding the global expansion of the privacy rights he tried to destroy." "And your parents?" "Fully recovered and incredibly proud," Priya said. "Dad keeps telling everyone that his daughter defeated the American surveillance state with mathematics. Mom is just happy I'm finally eating regularly again." Elena laughed. "And you, how are you adjusting to being the most famous cybersecurity expert in the world?" Priya considered the question. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman with no identity beyond being a billionaire's wife. Now she was the founder of the Global Privacy Foundation, the architect of quantum democracy, and the person responsible for fundamentally changing the relationship between technology and human rights. "I'm adjusting to being myself again," she said finally, "to using my skills for something that matters, to building instead of just surviving." "Any regrets?" Priya thought about the helicopter, about the months of abuse, about the systematic destruction of her confidence and independence. Then she thought about the billions of people who could now communicate privately, the journalists who could protect their sources, the activists who could organize without fear of oppressive governments. For the first time in the digital age, people could use technology without surrendering their fundamental right to privacy.
"None," she said. "Richard tried to kill me to protect the system of control. Instead, he created the person who would destroy that system forever." Elena raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. "To the Phoenix." "To the Phoenix," Priya agreed. That evening, Priya stood in her hotel room, looking out at the Hague skyline while reviewing the day's testimony. Her quantum-encrypted phone buzzed with messages from around the world, researchers wanting to collaborate on privacy projects, governments asking for help implementing democratic technology policies, students who wanted to learn quantum cryptography. But the message that made her smile was from Detective Sarah Chen in Seattle. Dr. Patel, thought you'd want to know. The Seattle PD just announced that all criminal investigations will now use quantum encrypted evidence storage to protect witness privacy. You've changed how we do police work. Thank you. Priya had survived being pushed from a helicopter, exposed a global surveillance conspiracy, and given digital privacy back to humanity. But perhaps most importantly, she'd reclaimed herself, Dr. Priya Patel, the brilliant cybersecurity expert who used technology to expand human freedom rather than restrict it. As she prepared for bed, Priya reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The woman who had woken up in that hospital bed 6 months ago had been broken, isolated, and convinced she was helpless against forces beyond her control. The woman who would testify again tomorrow was the architect of a new digital age, where privacy was protected by mathematics rather than laws, where surveillance required consent rather than secrecy, and where technology served humanity instead of controlling it. Richard Whitmore had tried to erase Dr. Priya Patel and replace her with a compliant victim. Instead, he had created the woman who would be remembered as the mother of digital freedom. The phoenix had not just risen from the ashes, she had set the world on fire with the light of liberation. And from those flames, a better digital civilization was being born. And this time, privacy was hard-coded into its very foundation, protected by the unbreakable laws of quantum physics and the indomitable will of a woman who refused to be silenced. The revolution was complete, and it had been written in code. 5 years later, Dr. Priya Patel stood in the gleaming headquarters of the Global Privacy Foundation in Geneva, watching through quantum-encrypted video feeds as the last authoritarian surveillance system on Earth went permanently dark. The People's Republic of North Korea had finally succumbed to internal pressure from citizens who could now communicate freely using her privacy protocols. "That's it," said Dr. Elena Volkov, now the Foundation's Chief Technology Officer, as she watched the final surveillance nodes disconnect. "Every human being on the planet now has unbreakable digital privacy rights." Priya smiled, but it was tinged with the wisdom that came from understanding the true cost of freedom. The technology is universal. Whether people choose to use it for liberation or oppression is still up to them. But at least now, they have the choice. 5 years ago, privacy was a privilege. Today, it's a technical reality. The transformation of global society had been more profound than either woman had anticipated. The democratization of quantum encryption hadn't just protected individual communications, it had fundamentally altered the balance of power between citizens and institutions. Governments could no longer spy on their people without consent. Corporations could no longer harvest personal data without explicit permission. The surveillance capitalism that had dominated the early 21st century had been rendered technologically obsolete. "Dr. Patel," came a voice from the conference room's quantum communication system. "This is Dr. Sarah Kim from the Seoul Digital Rights Institute. The South Korean Parliament just passed the Global Privacy Accords. That makes 195 countries that have formally recognized quantum privacy as a fundamental human right." "Congratulations, Dr. Kim. How are the implementation programs going?" "Beautifully. We've trained over 10,000 local technicians in quantum cryptography, and rural internet penetration has increased by 340% since people gained confidence that their communications couldn't be monitored by their government." This was the pattern that had emerged globally. When people could communicate privately, they engaged more freely with digital technology. When they didn't fear surveillance, they shared ideas, collaborated on innovations, and participated in democratic processes with unprecedented enthusiasm. The Foundation's offices buzzed with activity. Teams of cryptographers, human rights lawyers, and technology educators worked together to expand quantum privacy access to the world's most vulnerable populations. What had started as Priya's personal fight for survival had evolved into the largest human rights technology initiative in history. "Priya, you have a visitor," Elena said. Priya looked up to see Arjun entering with a young woman she didn't recognize, a teenager with bright, intelligent eyes and the kind of confident posture that suggested she was accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. "Priya, I'd like you to meet Zara Hassan. She's 17 years old. She just completed her PhD in quantum information theory from Cambridge University, and she's designed encryption protocols that make our current systems look like children's toys." Zara stepped forward with a slight smile. "Dr. Patel, your work inspired me to go into cybersecurity. I grew up in a refugee camp where my family's communications were monitored by 3 different governments. When your privacy protocol reached us, it was the first time in my life I could speak freely to my grandmother without fear." "What can I do for you, Zara?" Priya asked. "I want to show you something," Zara said, pulling out a device that looked like a simple smartphone. "This is a quantum mesh network node. It can provide secure internet access to any community on Earth without requiring any traditional infrastructure." Priya examined the device, her expert eye immediately recognizing its significance. "This could bring private internet access to every human being on the planet." "That's exactly what it's designed to do," Zara said. "No matter how remote their location, no matter how oppressive their government, everyone would have access to quantum encrypted communications." Elena whistled softly. "You're talking about making internet freedom as universal as sunlight." "I'm talking about finishing what Dr. Patel started, making digital privacy so fundamental that it can never be taken away again."
Priya felt a familiar emotion, the same combination of excitement and determination she'd experienced when first designing her quantum protocols in Richard's shadow. But this time, it wasn't driven by survival or revenge. It was driven by the pure joy of using technology to expand human possibility. "What do you need from the Foundation?" Priya asked. "Partnership," Zara said, "funding, expertise, and help with global deployment. I've calculated that we could provide quantum encrypted internet access to every human being on Earth within 18 months. "Done," Priya said without hesitation. "Elena, make this our top priority." As Zara and Elena began discussing technical specifications, Priya stepped out onto the Foundation's balcony overlooking Lake Geneva. The view was spectacular, but what made her smile was the knowledge that the conversation happening behind her was being protected by technology that made surveillance impossible. Her phone chimed with a message from Dr. Morrison, the psychiatrist Richard had tried to use to discredit her. "Dr. Patel wanted you to know that the trauma recovery program you funded has helped over 50,000 abuse survivors reclaim their technical careers. You're changing lives every day." Another message, this one from Detective Sarah Chen. "Priya, the Seattle Police Department just solved its 1,000th case using quantum encrypted evidence storage. Witness protection has never been more effective. Thank you for changing how we protect people." And finally, a message that made her heart swell with pride from her father. "Beta, just saw the news about your latest project. Mom and I are so proud of the woman you've become. You took your worst experience and used it to make the world better. That's the true measure of strength." Priya reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 5 years ago, she'd been pushed from a helicopter by a man who thought he could erase her identity and silence her voice. Richard Whitmore had tried to reduce Dr. Priya Patel to nothing more than a compliant victim. Instead, he had created the woman who would fundamentally transform the relationship between technology and human freedom. Richard was now serving life imprisonment in The Hague, his surveillance empire dismantled, his crimes exposed to the world.
But his ultimate punishment wasn't his prison cell. It was the knowledge that his attempt to destroy Priya had instead unleashed the very force that made his vision of digital tyranny impossible. As Priya returned to the conference room, she found Zara and Elena deep in conversation about quantum mesh protocols, their excitement infectious. Young technologists from around the world were joining the call virtually, offering to contribute to the project. Dr. Patel, Zara said as Priya rejoined them, I have a question. How did you know that democratizing privacy technology would be more powerful than just exposing the surveillance system? Priya considered the question carefully. Because I learned that the best revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. The best revenge is using your expertise to make sure they can never hurt anyone again. And the best way to do that? Build something better than what they tried to destroy, Priya said. Richard tried to turn technology into a tool of oppression, so I turned it into a tool of liberation. As the meeting continued late into the evening, with teams from 6 continents contributing to humanity's next great leap toward digital freedom, Priya realized that her transformation was complete. She was no longer the woman who had survived being pushed from a helicopter. She was no longer even the woman who had brought down a global surveillance conspiracy. She was Dr. Priya Patel, the architect of digital liberation, the woman who had proven that technology's highest purpose wasn't controlling humanity, but expanding human potential. The phoenix had not just risen from the ashes, she had become the eternal flame that would ensure digital freedom for generations to come. And in a world where privacy was protected by the unbreakable laws of quantum physics rather than the breakable promises of politicians, that flame would burn forever bright. What would you do if you had the technical skills to change the world? Sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating our enemies, but from building systems that make their harmful actions impossible. If you watch this story all the way through, thank you. If it resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow I've got another story just as crazy you won't want to miss. And remember, thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.